You don't just vanish from a secure military base, not without someone knowing something. But that's exactly what happened. And what they found months later? It changed everything. This story isn't just about a missing girl. It's about secrets buried so deep, even the people sworn to protect them were afraid to look. We're diving into a mystery that's haunted families, wrecked careers, and exposed a shadowy underbelly most Americans don't even know exists. What happened to Specialist Emily Renshaw at Fort Briarwood is not only strange, it's disturbing. And the truth didn't come out until someone broke every rule to find it. Let's rewind the clock to the 3rd of February, 2017, the last day anyone saw Emily alive. It started like any normal Friday on base. Fort Briarwood, a high-security U.S. Army installation tucked into the pine forests of central Georgia, was always buzzing with activity. But Specialist Emily Renshaw, 24 years old, didn't report for her morning training shift. She wasn't in her quarters, didn't respond to calls, and hadn't checked out of the base. At first, her absence didn't cause panic. Soldiers sometimes oversleep or get caught up in personal drama. But Emily wasn't the type to go off the radar. She was a decorated combat medic who had served overseas and had recently returned stateside after a grueling deployment in Afghanistan. Her record was spotless. Her fellow soldiers described her as laser-focused, always the first one in formation, never late, never distracted. So when noon rolled around and no one had heard from her, her unit leader filed an official missing person report. By 3 p.m., military police were knocking on doors across the base. When they got to her barracks, they found her room locked from the inside. That raised eyebrows. They had to force the door open. Inside, everything was untouched. Bed made, uniforms folded. Her ID badge, wallet, and even her phone were still sitting on the desk. It was like she had just evaporated. Here's where it gets weirder. There was a half-full cup of coffee still warm, a journal open to a half-written sentence. Her laptop was on, paused mid-email. The timestamp? 5:43 a.m., meaning she had been up early that day, possibly getting ready. Then nothing. No signs of forced entry, no struggle, no witnesses, and no cameras pointing toward her hallway. The military base had security footage from dozens of spots, but somehow not from the one hallway she lived in. That system just happened to be under maintenance that morning. Yeah, convenient. At first, the Army's official statement was simple. Specialist Renshaw is being treated as a missing person. There is no indication of foul play. But that didn't sit right with her mother, Denise Renshaw. Denise was a former Army nurse herself. She knew how these systems worked. And she didn't buy for 1 second that her daughter would just vanish. She flew to Georgia the next day and demanded answers. But all she got were tight-lipped officials, redacted reports, and the same dead-end message. We're doing everything we can. Weeks passed. No updates. No clues. The case was quietly downgraded from urgent active to routine missing person. That's when Denise decided she was done waiting. She hired a private investigator, a guy named Jack Sorensen, who used to work military intelligence and had a reputation for digging into the stuff others were scared to touch. And the first thing he noticed? Emily had submitted a whistleblower complaint just 4 days before she disappeared. That part had been buried. Through contacts in D.C., Sorensen got hold of a heavily redacted document. It referenced unethical behavior in the 3rd Medical Battalion, Emily's unit. Something about unauthorized experiments involving field test protocols. Most of it was blacked out, but the timing? Too close to ignore. And then came the anonymous tip. An unmarked envelope was delivered to Denise's hotel in Savannah, Georgia, postmarked from Fort Briarwood. No return address. Inside was a single photograph, grainy, clearly from a surveillance camera. It showed Emily walking toward a restricted section of the base. At 5:46 a.m., the same morning, she vanished. Here's the kicker. That wing was supposed to be locked down for renovation. No personnel allowed. Even Sorensen was stunned. He pulled every string he could to verify the photo. According to maintenance logs, that wing was being decommissioned, whatever that meant. But several other soldiers had reportedly seen lights on in that hallway at night. One said he heard strange mechanical sounds from behind the closed doors. Another swore he saw someone in a hazmat suit walk out once, then vanish into an unmarked truck. But they weren't talking on record. And who could blame them? You don't poke the bear when the bear is the U.S. military. By April, the Army had quietly pulled several high-ranking officers off the base, no reason given. And Sorensen found that 3 soldiers in Emily's unit had requested sudden transfers within days of her disappearance. Then came the bombshell. A former Briarwood janitor named Marcus Bell came forward. He'd worked nights in that restricted wing for months before being abruptly fired in late January. Why? He still didn't know. But he told Sorensen something chilling. "I don't know what they were doing in there," Marcus said, "but it wasn't normal. That place smelled like chemicals. Weird, thick air. They always told me not to go past the blue doors. Said it was for my safety." Marcus said he once saw Emily inside looking pale, nervous, talking to a man in civilian clothes wearing an access badge with no name. The next day, she was gone. And Marcus? He was fired 48 hours later. Denise took all this and went to the press. The story exploded. CNN, NBC, even some international outlets picked it up. The military scrambled to respond. They called the allegations baseless conspiracy theories and misinformation driven by grief. But then, the breakthrough came from the most unexpected place. 6 months after Emily vanished on a hot August morning, hikers found something strange in a ravine 40 miles south of the base. A duffel bag, torn, sun-bleached, stuffed beneath a pile of brush and branches, like someone had tried to hide it. Inside was a water-damaged uniform with Emily's name tag, along with something else. A journal. Hers. The pages were warped, many illegible, but some entries were still readable. And what they revealed cracked this case wide open. "I think they're watching me," one entry read. "Ever since I asked about the med tests, they've been weird. Sergeant Clemens told me to drop it, but I can't. If something's happening, people need to know." Another entry, dated 2 days before she vanished, was even darker. I copied some files from the restricted server. There's something called Project Echo. I don't know what it is yet, but it's not right. If something happens to me, I didn't run away. I'm not crazy. They'll lie. Please don't let them. That line hit Denise like a sledgehammer, and it put Sorensen in overdrive. With a new search warrant and mounting public pressure, federal investigators stormed the closed-off wing at Fort Briarwood. What they found behind those sealed doors was disturbing. Behind layers of rusted locks, false walls, and sealed ventilation panels, investigators uncovered a facility that didn't match any blueprint on file. It wasn't just a maintenance wing. It was something else, part lab, part observation unit, and part holding area. Fluorescent lights still flickered overhead, illuminating metal tables, surgical equipment, biometric scanners, and the strangest part, a full-body containment chamber bolted to the floor, like something from a sci-fi movie. Dust had settled thick across everything, but on one desk, a terminal still showed a login screen. Sorensen, who had joined the inspection as a civilian consultant, noticed something strange. The system wasn't military issue. It belonged to a private contractor called Intrasys Defense Solutions, a little-known tech firm that specialized in experimental field medicine and biotech. But here's the twist. Intrasys didn't officially exist anymore. It had been dissolved quietly 3 months before Emily disappeared. They weren't just running medical tests here. They were building something. Buried in the back of a filing cabinet, investigators found a single manila folder marked Echo A. No digital copy existed in the base's main system. Inside were classified briefings, testing logs, and handwritten notes referring to a trial program designed to enhance trauma response in combat medics. On paper, it looked like a cutting-edge simulation drill, but the logs told another story. One name appeared repeatedly in the documentation: Renshaw E-E. She was the primary human subject. She hadn't just stumbled onto something. She was in the middle of it. Turns out, the 3rd Medical Battalion had been quietly selected to test neurological stress inoculation. Translation? They were trying to condition soldiers to operate under extreme duress mentally and physically by subjecting them to high-intensity simulations that pushed the brain past its natural thresholds. Think virtual reality meets psychological warfare. But Emily had pushed back. According to one report, she had complained multiple times to superiors about the side effects. She reported blackouts, paranoia, insomnia, and short-term memory loss. Others in her unit described seeing her pace her room at night, whispering to herself, leaving sticky notes everywhere, like she was trying to remember something she kept forgetting. The last session she attended, based on the logs, lasted almost 11 hours, uninterrupted, no breaks, and no medical oversight. That was 2 days before she vanished. The fallout from the discovery was immediate. Public hearings were scheduled. Military officials went into PR lockdown. But behind the scenes, a new problem emerged. The case had gone from a missing soldier to a federal cover-up. Denise wasn't the only one grieving. Another family, the Harveys, stepped forward. Their son, Private Miles Harvey, had died during a routine exercise on base 3 months before Emily disappeared. The Army had told them it was dehydration, but now his mother revealed something horrifying. Miles had left a voicemail the night before he died. His voice was slurred, panicked. "They're testing something. I don't feel right. My head, it's like I'm in 2 places at once. If something happens, tell them it wasn't an accident." The Army never mentioned that voicemail. They deleted it from his official case file. One by one, families began questioning deaths and disappearances that had been brushed aside. A quiet pattern emerged, each case tied in some way to Fort Briarwood's shadow program. And nearly all had a common thread: Intrasis. But Intrasis wasn't operating alone. Sorensen traced their contracts back to a subsidiary of Lockridge Global, a defense conglomerate with deep pockets and deeper political ties. They had filed patents related to neural resilience enhancement and combat response feedback integration, tech speak for messing with soldiers' minds under pressure. Emily, somehow, had gotten access to those files. That's what Project Echo was, a prototype system built to implant artificial memory prompts using sound and image stimuli. Basically, they were testing a way to control memory formation during trauma. If that sounds dystopian, that's because it is. And Emily had written in her journal that she intended to leak the data. That made her dangerous, not just to her commanders, but to Lockridge Global, to the Army, and to every official who had signed off on the trials. As pressure mounted, an anonymous source from inside Fort Briarwood finally spoke. A former systems tech, he claimed he had worked briefly on the project's back end. And he confirmed what many feared. They weren't tracking soldier performance. They were tracking personality changes. And Renshaw? She was their outlier. She resisted the programming. He claimed that after her final session, Emily was flagged as non-compliant. 2 days later, she was listed missing. But here's where it gets truly unnerving. In a final twist, Sorensen managed to access archived satellite data from the morning of Emily's disappearance. It showed an unmarked vehicle leaving a rear gate of Fort Briarwood at 6:02 a.m., a gate only used for equipment delivery. The truck headed south into the swamp region outside of town, far from any official route. That's exactly the area where Emily's duffel bag was later found. So, if she left the base, she didn't walk. She was taken. With every piece falling into place, Sorensen filed for an emergency order to exhume an unmarked grave located just outside Fort Briarwood's security perimeter, a site flagged by cadaver dogs weeks earlier, but dismissed by military investigators. It took weeks of legal wrangling, but eventually, the court approved it. What they uncovered inside that grave silenced every doubter. Human remains, a partial uniform, dog tags scorched by fire, and dental records that confirmed what Denise had feared for months. It was Emily. The autopsy revealed bone fractures, defensive wounds, and signs of a powerful sedative in her system, one not used in standard military medicine. She hadn't been AWOL. She hadn't run. She had fought back. And she had died trying to expose the truth. In the days that followed, the Army issued a formal apology. Kind of. They called it a tragic error in protocol. They refused to take questions about Project Echo. Lockridge Global denied involvement, and Intrasys's remaining executives vanished from public view. But the journal pages, the ones that survived, were eventually made public. One final entry stood out. It read, "If you're reading this, it means they failed to erase me completely. I might not win, but I won't be silent. Not anymore." That sentence was read aloud on Capitol Hill 6 months later by Denise Renshaw. She stood in front of a packed hearing room and stared down generals, senators, and defense lobbyists. Her voice didn't shake once. "You took my daughter's body," she said, "but you didn't take her voice." The investigation is still ongoing. Several officials have resigned. Fort Briarwood has been permanently decommissioned, but the documents and what's still missing from them suggest we've only seen the surface. The rest of this script will dive deeper into the final fallout, the classified tech Emily was exposed to, and why whistleblowers who try to expose military secrets like this rarely live long enough to tell their stories. But more importantly, we'll uncover how a 4-year-old medic nearly brought down a billion-dollar operation with nothing but a notebook and the truth. In the aftermath of Emily's confirmed death, the news cycle went into overdrive. Headlines flared with buzzwords: military experiment, gone wrong, soldier's body found after months of silence, secret program uncovered at U.S. base. For a brief moment, the public was paying attention, but it didn't take long before the noise faded and something shinier came along. Behind the scenes, though, something else was happening. Files tied to Project Echo started disappearing, not just being redacted, full deletions from internal servers. Requests for Freedom of Information documents were delayed, denied, or accidentally corrupted. Denise's legal team noticed that multiple witnesses were suddenly unreachable. Phones disconnected. Emails bouncing back. One soldier, a former friend of Emily's, was found dead in his apartment 2 weeks after the hearings. Official cause? Suicide. But the gun was wiped clean. Even Sorensen started watching his back. His apartment was broken into. Nothing stolen except the flash drive with the raw files he'd copied from the base terminal. When he called to report it, the local police said it was likely random. But when he checked the building's security footage, that camera, just like on Emily's floor, was under maintenance that night. This was bigger than they'd imagined. And the deeper he dug, the more he realized Emily wasn't the only target. She was just the one who wouldn't stay quiet. But here's the thing. Emily had outsmarted them. Before she vanished, she mailed a second journal, a backup, to a P.O. box in Tallahassee under a fake name. The key to that box had been tucked into a false pocket in her uniform, unnoticed during the initial evidence collection. Weeks later, when federal analysts reviewed her personal effects again, they found it. And when Denise opened the mailbox with that tiny key, what she pulled out left her speechless. It wasn't just a journal, it was a blueprint. Emily had mapped out everything she had learned: diagrams of the echo chamber, the behavioral conditioning loops, transcripts of whispered conversations between officers. She'd named names. She'd drawn lines between the trials at Fort Briarwood and older operations. One in 2009 in Uzbekistan, another in 2013 in Djibouti, where memory recalibration programs were tested on foreign prisoners. And at the center of it all, a name she underlined 3 times: Dr. Adrian Voss. Voss had once been a rising star in the field of military psychology. He wrote papers on empathy suppression and neural override thresholds, stuff that sounded like sci-fi mind control, but had been quietly adopted by dark-budget research programs. He disappeared from the public eye in 2015. Guess where he resurfaced? As the lead civilian consultant for Intrasys. Emily had met him once, according to her notes. She said he never blinked, never smiled, like he was watching a lab rat instead of a human being. She described how, during one debriefing, he'd asked her, "Do you ever wonder if your memories are really yours?" At first, she thought it was a joke. Then he leaned closer and whispered, "You'd be surprised how easy it is to plant new ones." That line haunted her. She wrote about it 3 separate times in different sections of her notes, almost like she was trying to convince herself it had really happened. Because after her final test, she started losing chunks of time. She'd wake up not remembering what day it was. she found sticky notes in her own handwriting, reminding her of simple facts: her name, her rank, her mother's phone number. That's what Echo did. It didn't just monitor the brain, it rewired it. When Sorensen took this second journal to a contact in the Department of Defense, they refused to comment. One source, off the record, admitted the tech was real, but not supposed to be used on active U.S. personnel. But it was, Sorensen said. The source just nodded. Emily's death triggered a cascade inside the Pentagon. 2 colonels were reassigned. 1 general retired for personal reasons. The Senate began drafting legislation to ban neurological experimentation on soldiers without express consent. But the language was vague, full of loopholes. And not a single person from Lockridge Global was charged. They paid a fine, quietly, less than 1% of their annual revenue. Business went on. Denise kept pushing. She gave speeches, met with whistleblower advocacy groups. She toured the country with what was left of her daughter's journal. She called it Emily's Voice. And then, something unexpected happened. A nurse from another base came forward. She said she'd treated Emily once months before her disappearance during a classified exercise. Emily had arrived disoriented, nose bleeding, barely able to speak. But the nurse recognized her because she said Emily grabbed her wrist and whispered, "They're making us forget." The next day, the nurse was reassigned. Her report on the incident never made it into Emily's file. But that small detail matched something in the journal, a drawing Emily had made of a white room with a single speaker in the ceiling, playing the same phrase over and over. "You are not in danger. You are not being watched. This is your memory." Over and over, until the words lost meaning. It was a method used in psychological conditioning repetition to induce cognitive dissonance, designed to make the subject question what was real and what wasn't. And it had worked, almost. But Emily, stubborn to the end, kept writing, kept recording, kept trying to anchor herself to what she knew was true. She used code words, numbers, maps, and in the final page of her journal, she left coordinates. Remote, deep in the woods, outside any official boundary. It took 3 separate expeditions before Sorensen found the place. Just a clearing, a rusted trailer. Inside, a generator, a hard drive. On it, hours of video. Recordings Emily had made sometimes with her phone, sometimes with hidden base cams. Footage of the test rooms, of soldiers being led in blindfolded, of officers in civilian suits reviewing data on brain scans. One clip showed a soldier screaming while a flashing strobe light pulsed overhead. Another clip, it showed Emily, sitting at the desk in that chamber, hooked to electrodes, eyes closed, and a voice saying, "Begin Phase 4." She never flinched. That footage was sent to Congress. It leaked, it spread. And finally, the world believed her. But the story doesn't end there. Because while Emily's story was finally told, Project Echo didn't die with her. In fact, buried in the metadata of the hard drive files was one more chilling detail. A program tag marked Echo Beta. Status: active. Location: redacted. Meaning someone, somewhere, picked up right where Fort Briarwood left off. And this time, they were covering their tracks. The words Echo, Beta, active hit like a second death sentence. For Denise, it wasn't enough to just expose what had happened. She wanted it stopped. She wanted the people behind it named, dragged into the light, and buried so deep in court they'd never climb out. But the deeper she dug, the more it felt like trying to punch through fog. Every answer brought 2 more questions. Every lead ended in silence. Even Sorensen, usually fearless, usually unflinching, started pulling back. One morning, Denise called and he didn't answer. Hours later, he sent a single text. "They're watching me. I need to cool off. Don't trust new contacts. Lockridge is still moving pieces." That was the last she heard from him for 3 months. In his absence, she went back to where it all began, Fort Briarwood, or what was left of it. The base had been officially shut down, but remnants remained. Fencing, watchtowers, long shadows, and broken glass. She stood at the rusted gate, staring in, clutching Emily's last journal like a compass. There was one entry she hadn't fully decoded yet, one that felt unfinished. It read, "They called it beta, but I saw the files. It's not a new test. It's a continuation. Arizona, civilian site, Warehouse 7. Connected to Phase 4B, Voss said, if this works, we'll have a clean slate protocol." That's when I knew. This isn't about soldiers. It's about the rest of us. Emily had discovered something terrifying. Project Echo wasn't limited to the military. They were planning to test on civilians next. And that changed everything. Denise contacted a former journalist named Elise Montgomery, an investigative reporter who had once exposed a trafficking network linked to private defense contractors. Elise didn't hesitate. She knew the signs. She'd seen this pattern before. Classified programs, buried bodies, and corporate entities using black ops budgets to test whatever they couldn't get approval for legally. Together, they followed the clue. Warehouse 7 led them to an abandoned distribution center in Eloy, Arizona, a nondescript structure surrounded by old chain-link fence and thorn bush. No signs, no guards, no cameras. But when they entered through a side window, what they found made their skin crawl. The building looked dead until they hit the basement. There, beneath a rusted hatch, was a lower-level clean, sterile, humming with low power, clearly not abandoned. Inside were 3 rooms all locked, but one had a crack in the door. Inside, cots, monitors, headsets, and a single sheet of paper left behind. It read, Phase 4B trial suspended, subject non-responsive, escalation risk flagged, archive pending relocation. It was dated just 3 weeks earlier. Denise stood frozen. She'd thought Emily's death was the end. But this was the real horror. Someone was still trying to finish what they started. Not just echoing memories, but rewriting them. Whole personalities wiped, replaced, reinstalled. And if they'd already moved on to civilian testing, how many people were walking around right now, not even knowing they'd been part of it? Elise took pictures, video, every shred of proof they could grab. And then they ran, because whoever had been there might come back. They spent the next week in hiding, bouncing between cheap motels. Elise published a partial expose on an anonymous blog, using scrambled IPs and false metadata. It caught fire, millions of views in 2 days. People started asking questions. Forums lit up. Whistleblowers emerged slowly, cautiously. One anonymous source dropped a file dump into Elise's encrypted inbox. Inside was a collection of internal Lockridge memos, some dated as far back as 2006, outlining behavioral modification strategies using low-exposure neural disruption. In short, subliminal programming. Everything from test phrases to audio loops designed to shift a subject's behavior without conscious awareness. It was real. It had been going on for years. And now, it was scalable. One memo from 2015, flagged as top priority, outlined a partnership between Intrices and a marketing company contracted by a large social platform. The document referenced indirect vector conditioning, embedding behavior cues in video ads and notifications. The goal wasn't military resilience. The goal was public control. It was the nightmare Emily had tried to warn everyone about. If even part of it was true, they were no longer dealing with a rogue military experiment. This was a system, a machine with arms in tech, media, politics, and defense. Echo wasn't just a name. It was a model. And people like Emily? They were test subjects. Collateral. Denise nearly broke. The weight of it, the scale, the scope, it was too much. But every time she thought of quitting, she remembered that final journal entry. Emily hadn't asked for revenge. She hadn't asked for justice. She just asked not to be erased. And that was something Denise could still fight for. They returned to D.C. and demanded a meeting with the Oversight Committee. Armed with Elise's footage, the whistleblower documents, and the satellite data, they made their case behind closed doors. One senator, known for grandstanding on privacy rights, promised a full investigation. "You have my word," he said. But as they walked out, Elise noticed something strange. A man in a black car, engine running, watching the door. Same man, different days, different cities. They were being followed. 2 days later, Elise's blog was wiped. Domain gone, hosting account terminated, and her laptop bricked remotely. A message flashed briefly before it shut off. "You've seen enough. Stop digging." The warning was clear, but it came too late. The wrong people were paying attention now, and too many of them wanted to know more. Emily's story was spreading, not just online in hearings, in classrooms, in whispered conversations across every military base that ever housed a closed wing. Former contractors leaked photos. Soldiers started talking. Parents started asking questions about their kids' accidents. And through it all, one quiet phrase kept showing up: Echo lives. It had become a movement, not a protest, not a riot, but a knowing. People had seen the cracks in the illusion, and once you saw them, you couldn't unsee them. Emily's name became shorthand for a deeper truth, that sometimes the war isn't out there. It's in your head, and you might not even know it's being fought. Denise never got closure, not the kind people imagine. There was no courtroom vindication, no public takedown of the people behind Emily's death. But she did get something better. She got truth. She got exposure. And in doing that, she took away their greatest weapon: silence. Months passed. And while the headlines died, the story didn't. Emily's name became a whisper in military forums, conspiracy boards, college classrooms. Some thought it was a hoax. Others called it a tragedy. But the ones who knew the ones who'd been close, they called it a warning. Denise Renshaw turned her grief into fuel. She founded the Echo Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to exposing unauthorized human experimentation in defense research. She gave lectures at universities. She partnered with whistleblower legal teams. She became a thorn in the side of agencies that preferred shadows to sunlight. But even then, she could never shake the feeling that someone was watching. Not paranoia, intuition, an instinct sharpened by loss. There were little things. An encrypted flash drive arriving by courier, no return address, no explanation. On it, a single folder labeled Echo C. Inside, an updated version of the neural conditioning software Emily had been subjected to. It was more advanced, streamlined, portable. One file, in particular, stood out: Echo Remote Trigger Mobile Compatible. Denise showed it to cybersecurity experts. Their reaction? Immediate alarm. The code wasn't just real, it was deployable, and it could be embedded in audio, podcasts, music, advertisements. The software didn't reprogram people instantly, but it could influence, it could condition. A little nudge here, a shift in perception there, enough to alter behavior patterns over time. It was weaponized suggestion. Someone had wanted her to see that, not to scare her, to warn her, to let her know. The project had evolved. It was still alive, still spreading. Elise published a limited report, hiding behind layers of digital armor. But the reach was smaller this time. Too many people were afraid. Too many others dismissed it as sci-fi garbage. And a month after publishing, her apartment was raided. The feds said it was unrelated. Suspicion of leaked classified materials. No charges were filed, but her footage was gone, her backups wiped. They wanted this buried, scrubbed from memory, literally. But memory has teeth. And Denise, for all her loss, wasn't alone anymore. She started getting letters, dozens, then hundreds, from soldiers, from scientists, from family members of others who had gone missing, or changed, or returned from deployments, different, empty-eyed, unsettled, hearing things, losing time. One woman wrote, "My brother came back from Fort Briarwood and didn't recognize our dog. He asked if we always had one. We've had that dog for 8 years. Another, "My son was in a test program, said it was for mental fitness. Now he writes the same sentence over and over. Don't look at the light. He says it helps him remember who he is." And another, "I saw the white room. I wasn't supposed to. They told me it was a dream. I believed them until I saw your daughter's name." Denise posted the letters, all of them, on the Echo Initiative site. No names, no addresses, just truth. Raw and ugly and real. Then something strange happened. The site was taken offline by a massive surge in traffic. Not a DDoS attack, not sabotage. It was real people, thousands of them, all at once. Searching, reading, waking up. It wasn't the exposure that scared the system. It was the attention. When people start paying attention, lies lose power. And truth, no matter how terrifying, starts to breathe. That's when someone from the inside finally stepped forward. His name was Christopher Leary, a former systems architect for Lockridge Global. He had worked on the second generation of Echo protocols, the mobile-compatible version. He reached out to Denise in secret, through a burner account, and what he said changed everything. Emily was right. Echo wasn't a test, it was a blueprint. She found the failsafe, the part of the code that couldn't be controlled. She was immune to the override loop. That's why she had to disappear. She didn't just resist the programming, she cracked it. Emily had broken the system, or at least exposed the flaw that made it unstable. And they couldn't allow that. Leary passed her a fragment of source code proof, a line Emily had altered before her last session. It triggered a fail loop that interrupted the neural sync process. In plain terms, she found a way to disconnect the suggestion from the memory, meaning she could hear the voice and still remember who she was. That was the whole secret. Not immunity, awareness. And that's what Project Echo feared the most. Because if enough people became aware, truly aware, the system would collapse. Propaganda, programming, perception, manipulation, it only works when people don't realize it's happening. But once you see the strings, you can never unsee them. Emily saw the strings, she pulled them, and it cost her everything. Denise took that code. She published it, quietly, buried it in a website disguised as a fitness blog, shared it in puzzle forums, embedded it in an audio loop, and uploaded it to white noise playlists. Anyone looking for it, really looking, could find it. She turned her daughter's resistance into a signal. And little by little, people started hearing it. Not as a revolution, not as a war, but as a whisper. This is your memory. It belongs to you. The story faded from the news. Congress passed a watered-down bill. The Pentagon released a final statement. No further action required. Lockridge Global rebranded under a new name, operating quietly overseas. And Fort Briarwood bulldozed, paved over. But Emily's story didn't end with concrete and silence. It lived on in the cracks, in the letters, in the people who started looking at their own lives differently, questioning what they were told, remembering things they'd once forgotten, a smell, a voice, a phrase that didn't feel quite right. Awareness spread, not fast, not loud, but enough. Denise visits her daughter's grave once a month. She never brings flowers. Emily wouldn't have wanted that. Instead, she brings something else: pages. Letters from people who said her story, helped them remember, helped them wake up. She reads them out loud. Sometimes, she swears she can feel a breeze kick up when she does, like someone listening. Maybe that's imagination, maybe not. But either way, one thing's for sure. Emily Renshaw didn't die in vain. She died fighting for the truth. And the truth, once spoken, cannot be silenced. If you think this story ends here, think again. Truth has a way of resurfacing, of echoing again and again until someone finally listens. So if you're still watching, you just might be one of them. If this shook you even a little, don't stop here. Watch the next video popping up now, the one they don't want you to see.